How's it going, guys? Welcome to video 2 for chapter 19. So we discussed in the last video how agricultural improvements led to population growth and also to migration to the cities. We also learned how technological improvements start to change industrialization during the very early phases. What we're going to talk about in this video is how all of this got started in Great Britain. So first, let's talk about why Britain. Okay, why did this all start in Britain? Well, there are several reasons. The first is that Britain had an abundance of natural resources. It had plenty of natural ports and rivers for both trade and water power. That's good for transportation. It's also good for hydropower, which was an early form of power for factories. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. It also had large supplies of coal for steam engines. It also had iron for the construction of new machines. You can see the British coal fields in the 19th century. Not too much in the south of it, but especially up around north, an awful lot. So coal is obviously necessary for the furnaces for making steam power work. Now, we discussed in the last video, thanks to the improvements in agriculture, Britain also had a growing population. And this growing population could man the new factories in the industrial age. You see how in the 17 and 1800s it really starts to go up and continues to skyrocket in the 1900s into the 21st century. But this period right around here is what we're focusing on, where it makes a quick left and really starts to climb above 10 million and continue to go up, up, and up. Also, trade. It had a booming economy because of overseas trade. Britain had a large empire in the 1800s. Here you see, let me get the pen out of there. You see Britain right here, and you see all of the different trade routes that it went through the Caribbean, to Canada, that was still a part of it, to Africa, to India, all the way into the South China Sea. So they were going all over the place. And it was bringing in wealth for the business class. These wealthy merchants would soon be looking for new ways to invest their money. Britain also had a very business-friendly government. It's what we call a laissez-faire government, right, where they stay out of business. An easy way to remember that is when laissez kind of sounds like lazy. When you're lazy, you don't get involved. The government doesn't get involved in business. It lets it do its own thing. Plus, on top of it, it also had a strong navy that protected its shipping lanes. Okay, the British Navy was the most powerful in the world, so British merchant ships were well protected in all of these lanes. And it encouraged entrepreneurs to create new forms of wealth. Now, when the Industrial Revolution began, it was largely concentrated in the textile industry. Textiles is just a fancy word for cloth. It could be shirts, it could be, napkins, could be tablecloths, could be things for sales, whatever. But this industry was built on a resource that was not native to Britain, and that is cotton. Now, cotton was supplied by Britain's overseas empires, especially in Africa, India, and until the Revolution, the southern states in the U.S., but the cotton was shipped to Britain and produced into cloth there. Originally, this was done through the system called the putting out system. And this was something we talked about in a previous chapter. And the putting out system was, it's pretty self-explanatory here with the picture. The merchant would bring the raw material, the cotton here, into the village, and it would bring it directly to the homes of the workers. You'd have spinners that would take the cotton and make it into thread, and then it would go to the weavers' cottages where they would take the thread, and then they would sew that into different types of cloth. Then the merchant would get it back at the end of it, the finished cloth, and then he'd bring that to market to sell and so forth. It worked pretty well during the early part, but this was a slow process. That's an important thing to remember, right? The putting out system was slow. The growing population led to a growing demand for cloth, and the old system just couldn't keep up. So this growing demand led to inventors to come up with new inventions to improve production. These revolutionized the British textile industry. You had the flying shuttle. This it made weaving so fast that it actually outpaced the spinners. They couldn't come up with the thread fast enough. So they decided to come up with a new invention for that, the spinning jenny. Now you look at these and you think that these are very kind of old-fashioned ones, and they are by today's standards, but the basics of it are still used. You're now replacing manpower, with just a couple of old women in the villages kind of doing the sewing and the weaving by themselves. Now you're replacing it with machines, and it can be done much faster. It can be done in higher quantity and more efficiently as well. Excuse me. Now, the increased demand for cotton also led to an invention out of America that revolutionized cotton production, and this we're talking about Eli Whitney's cotton gin. Eli Whitney invented this in 1793, and it made cotton production much faster and more profitable. It also had the unfortunate consequence of strengthening slavery in the South, but you'll learn about that next year in U.S. history. Now, all these new machines made the putting out system obsolete. They could produce way faster than a few people sewing at home, as we just mentioned before. Plus, these machines, you look at them, these were pretty big, clunky machines. They were too big to put up in, the attic of some little cottage. So manufacturers then began building factories. And these were larger buildings to house the machines. You've got your classic industrial textile mills and factories, and you notice that they were built along water. You kind of needed to do that. Let me move my picture out of the way so you can see the wheel here. They needed to be next to running water, streams, and rivers in order to power the machines. Now, eventually, these smaller factories gave rise to larger ones. You can see even in these pictures how they're starting to become multi-story and big ones. And these larger ones could hold hundreds of workers, hundreds of machines, and it could just churn out products at a much, much greater rate. Now, technology didn't only have an impact on production. It greatly affected transportation as well. Business owners wanted all the goods being produced to be shipped farther and, most importantly, faster than ever before. If you could ship it faster, you can make more trips and you can make more profit. Water was still the preferred method of shipping, but this presented a problem where you didn't have natural waterways like rivers. So new technology compensated for that with the building of canals. Canals are man-made waterways, and they connected industrial sites throughout Britain. Let me back down here. So you can see 1790 to 1800, all the different canalways, right? The blue are natural waterways and the red are the canals that would connect them. So now, waterways that would only go north and south, you could connect them going east and west or vice versa and so forth. They really would go all over the place. They were not used for large boats. You would just mostly barges. And you notice here you've got a horse or some type of beast of burden pulling it along the side. It definitely increased it, but new inventions would soon make this outdated as well, because the canals were soon replaced as the primary overland transportation, though, by the steam locomotive. Now, the steam locomotive, you look at the early forms of it, very, very primitive compared to, even the ones that we think of by the late 1800s, but still the fact that using steam power, using coal, you could propel a vehicle that you didn't need wind. So if you didn't need horses, that was very revolutionary. And before you know it, they were laying tracks all throughout Great Britain. Just erase this as well. Okay, so in 1840, you see the different railway lines. You had a few that went through the center of it, not too much. 1852, that's only 12 years. Look at the difference. Okay, from this to this, it becomes just a whole huge network of it. So the steam locomotive led to an explosion in railway lines. And eventually you would see this in other countries such as the United States and Germany and so forth. Okay, so another fairly quick video just talking about, again, the early stages of the Industrial Revolution and how it started in Great Britain. And then in the next one, we'll start getting into some of the other changes you saw throughout society.